Hey, what is going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. It's going to be a reaction video, would you believe it? But not in the traditional sense. I'm going to be looking at a video that was recently published by Tettles, and the title of the video is "Why Your Class Won't Be Meta in Mythic Plus," and he's specifically breaking down why things are the way they are and why certain specs are, recurringly just very, very strong. And so I thought it was a really good video. I wanna preface this by saying I do think that it was a really good video. And Tettles always seems to execute things really well. He just has a really good, I think, grounded kind of take on a lot of things. And I like that about him. So I watched this video and I just thought it was really good. And I wanted to kind of discuss more so on the tail end of his video some of the solutions, because he kind of explains why things are the way they are, and then has a little bit at the end where it's like, this is how we could change it. And I think I wanted to kind of break some things down and analyze what could be done and why there are pros and cons to the changes there. But of course, because I'm reviewing or reacting to a Tettles video, I thought I would take the opportunity to wear my favorite Balanced Druids merch. Of course, I'm talking about Nagura here. I've got that on there. So I think we're appropriately dressed for this video. Going into this, we can see Tettles put out this video, right? You should definitely go check it out. I'm going to link it in the description as well if you haven't already seen it. It's literally just been published today, so you may not have seen it yet. But it's a pretty decent video, like, 30 minutes long. You can probably check it out on your lunch break and whatnot. And yeah, definitely worth your watch. But you don't need to go and watch that video to then understand what I'm going to be discussing here. I will kind of summate some of the things that he discussed in his video, and then we'll go from there. So basically, in the video that he did publish, though, he looks at the state of Mythic Plus and what specs are doing really well, and then he has his whole text document, which is actually really, really cool. And I like that he constructed this. And I mean, like I said, Tettles he's just got his head screwed on right, and he's you can tell he's a smart, educated boy. And he just does things very systematically, and I like that. So he's got his little text document, and then he's using his little Photoshop skills to analyze, the DPS to utility and where certain specs kind of fall on that line. So he's analyzing like mage and rogue and stuff like that. So pretty cool video. And then at the end, just kind of discusses what Blizzard can sort of do about it, and whether there's anything that can really be done. So good video, definitely worth your watch. Check it out. Now, I made a few notes watching this video, and I made my own document, right? So I've got Tettles Diss Track Volume 1, obviously, up at the top there, and we're reacting to Tettles. So the hypothesis that Tettles set out to kind of answer or test was some classes have an easier time becoming meta in Mythic Plus. And I think this is like just objective fact, right? Like this is kind of just true, right? We know that there's like season after season, there are certain specs that just perform very, very well and are commonly taken, right? We've seen, I'm going to say Outlaw Rogue specifically, it performs very well in the Mythic Plus environment, but Rogue in general, Fire Mage or Frost Mage, normally it's one of those two. Normally Frost does well. So at the beginning of BFA, I think Frost was doing pretty well, and then it kind of shifted onto Fire as you got to higher level keys, where things lived a little bit longer, and tanks were more tanky, and they didn't have to, you didn't have to just have your Frost Mage kiting everything out for you. And then we see specs like Balanced Druid normally does pretty well, or Resto Druid. We normally see one of those two make an appearance. You get access to Battle Res. You get things like Vortex and Typhoon, and they in general have just really good Druids just have really good utility across the board. And so yes, we normally see Druids do well. We see things like tanks. Every dungeon, there's always a tank in every dungeon I've ever watched. There's always a tank. So that's weird. They always have those. No, but you see things. I mean, Tettles even mentions the fact that like Blood Decay normally or should in theory be like one of the strongest tanks in Mythic Plus, if not the strongest tank. And the reason why it isn't currently is just because Blizzard just get back down there. They keep the reins on it, right? They keep it reined in. because it would in theory be very, very good. You've got things like mass grip. You would have things like, well, just their self-sustain, right? Which allows their healer to just be doing more DPS and whatnot once you get to those higher key levels, and various other reasons. I'm not a tank, but you know what I'm getting at. So there are certain specs that just are recurring, like very strong, and yeah, and I think that's just is a true hypothesis. And so, are we happy with this as a community? And if some of you out there are going to say, "Yep, this is fine. I'm totally happy with this," and that's cool. That's great. I'm not here to change your mind. If you are happy with it, then that's fine. I don't, you know. And if as a community we say, "Yeah, that's okay," that 5 specs in the game are really, really strong, and the other 30 or so are gonna have a struggle. Now, I personally don't see that as a good thing for the game. I don't think that's healthy, where, you know, only a select handful of specs are very, very good. And I'm not even going to say classes, like a handful of specs, right? I'm not even going to put that out into classes. A handful of specs are very good, and the rest of us kind of just have to deal with it. And I don't think that's great. You know, I know something like League of Legends is very different, where League of Legends, you know, you have hundreds of champions, and you can just load into it. You know, you can start a game, play one champion, 30 minutes later you're on a completely different champion, and nothing's changed. You haven't had to go and do your more dailies, you haven't had to go and level it, you haven't had to gear it. You can just log in, boom, I'm going to play this champion, I'm going to play that champion. But some things that we see in League of Legends is a lot, there's way more diversity in the meta, or well, at least in like semi-competitive play, right? Like on the ladder and whatnot. At least in ranked games, you can see a lot of diversity, which is good. So, the main issues then that need to be balanced, I would say, are the utility. And I mean, this is going off of what Tettles said in his video, where he looked at utility, and I think he named polarizing utility, and then of course the damage profiles. So for utility, you know, you bring in things like Trent's Shroud, etc., or are you bringing things like a Soothe and a Dispel? You know, where do you fall on that line, and or on that spectrum? And you know, some utility is really, really impactful, like we say with trees, Ring of Peace, Shroud. These are things that are going to allow you to, I mean, not necessarily Ring of Peace there, but things like trees and Shroud, they're going to allow you to, as Tettles puts it, like change your route, and they're going to allow you to kind of spec your route around having access to these things. Your tank's going to be able to pull bigger if they have access to things like trees, or they're going to have to kite less, whereas things like Shroud are going to allow you to skip certain sets of trash, which means that you can find that trash count elsewhere and be more efficient with your time. So there's things like that. Damage profiles, obviously, there's uncapped or capped AoE. There's things like low burst cooldowns, or low CD burst cooldowns, or things that with a higher CD, and everything kind of falls along that spectrum of impact. But that's kind of what we're looking at when we discuss the damage profiles. So obviously, if you're like a fire mage, you've got a short cooldown that does a lot of AoE damage, is uncapped, then you're going to be very, very desirable in Mythic Plus, where it's all about pulling big, bursting it down, moving on to the next pack, or completely removing something from, like, removing an aspect from a fight, right? If you can just remove prides from a dungeon by bringing a combusting fire mage, then that just overall means you're saving healer cooldowns, you're saving tank cooldowns, you're saving DPS defensives and DPS cooldowns, which then allows you to, yeah, do cool things, go boss, go trash, go big, whatever. So when we look at the solutions to some of these issues, if you even see them as issues, you may not, you may be totally happy with, you know, how things are, which is fine. But when we look at the potential solution to this, the main thing that we're trying to solve is inclusivity, right? We're trying to increase the diversity of specs and classes that are taken to dungeons at a high level. Because, I mean, and even when we discuss these things, the meta of the MDI and high-end Mythic Plus, you know, these 3K players and teams that are doing 26, you know, 24, 25, 26 keys and whatnot, this, for some reason, for whatever reason, shapes the meta at a 10 key and a 15 key, where it shouldn't. Right? And so even though you may not be trying to push the highest keys, you're definitely going to be kind of left out a bit because you're not playing one of these meta specs. or you could potentially be more likely to miss out on things because you're not playing the right spec, right? So that's what we're trying to solve, is inclusivity. So when I look at some of these solutions, I would suggest things like widening the class utility. So instead of a specific spec having, the core utility of the class, you would just make sure that the class is exactly equal. So all specs of the class are equal. And this would be something like Balance Druid and Feral Druid. Balance brings trees and innovate, and Feral doesn't. And so it allows for Balance Druid to be way more favorable. You could also look at things like Shamans, where there's a difference in potency for the different earth elementals. So I think like Enhancement is weaker compared to Elemental and Resto. Whereas you could look like Warlock specs and Interrupts, right? So by making it just kind of more equal across the board, now you're suddenly, instead of looking for 5 specs, you're looking for potentially like 15 specs, or you've at least tripled the amount of potential people that could join your key, because now instead of needing a specific spec for utility, maybe you just need a member from that class. And of course, that depends on if you're tank, DPS, or healer. There will still be some kind of vetting process there, but at least it will widen it a little bit more, where you're just looking for a certain class. And the benefits of this are cutting down on queue time. So even if you're saying, oh, there's no issue, I like Fire Mage being where it is and whatever, and Balance and I like Vengeance where it's at, that's fine. But something like this could help you by cutting down on your queue times, by not having to wait for that specific really good class or really good spec. Potentially, you could just be looking for a class. You also can widen the potential pool of suitors. So again, it's allowing you more freedom in choosing certain classes rather than having to pick specific specs. But there are, of course, issues with it where everything just kind of feels a bit samey. You're gonna have, like just warrior specs feeling the same, warlocks, mages, like just feeling the same. And it is nice to have some kind of spec identity and feel like I am this specific spec of a class and not just I am this class as a whole. Do the benefits outweigh the cons, I guess? I don't know. That's for you to decide. I guess then we could look at some specs where this is already kind of the case, right? So we have some classes that already have shared utility. So for example, monks, where all monks have Ring of Peace, stun, their leg sweep, they have paralysis, and they have dispels. So like monk is pretty like equal across the board, right? But you still don't see a group saying, oh, well, we can't find a Windwalker, hey, let's bring a Brewmaster. Oh, we can't find a Windwalker, let's bring a Mistweaver. So even though there is this equality in utility across the specs, say like monk, you're still not seeing these other specs being played because people specifically want this Windwalker because of the damage profile, right? As well as that utility that it brings. But also, like I say, because monk only has one DPS spec, you can't directly compare something like a Windwalker to a Brewmaster, because that position of tank may already be filled by, say, a Vengeance, right? So even though you might be able to say, oh, well, we can't get a Windwalker, can we bring a Brewmaster? Oh, no, we can't, because we already have our tank spot filled. And that's already locked in. So just utility alone, I don't think will fix this issue. So then when we break down like damage profiles, I think this is the most difficult challenge to solve, right? Because it's not just about Mythic Plus when you look at these damage profiles. When you look at, say, PvP, like you look at certain specs that might be really strong in PvP or in Raid or both, but they're lackluster in Mythic Plus. Now, is that okay for that spec to be bad in one area of the game? Yeah, that's pretty healthy for some things to be good in some areas and bad in others. But I don't think in the state of the game that we're in now, where everyone has to be good at everything, everyone needs a stun, an AoE stun, everyone needs a short kick, everyone needs some kind of game-changing utility, everyone needs a dispel or whatever. Like, we're at a point where everyone needs everything, and if you're missing some of these core things, then you kind of struggle or can struggle. And so I think when we look at should something be good in some areas and bad in others, I don't know. We're at a point where you kind of need to have everything. So it's the question of, can you unify the damage profiles, and should you? Should you make it so that all mage specs are this short CD, high burst damage in uncapped AoE? Not necessarily. I mean, you look at something like Arcane, where it normally performs very well on a single target, where you can kind of just stand still like a patchwork standstill and kind of just smack the thing. Arcane normally performs quite well in that scenario. I don't currently know in Shadowlands, its damage profile, how it's performing now. But I imagine it's more of the same. Whereas like Fire Mage is just built for Mythic Plus. So should you change what Arcane is good at to then be more suited to Mythic Plus, that's then going to affect its ability to play in Raid as well. So, is that fair? Should that be a thing? And then I go further to say, Mythic Plus, should you allow for a range of successful styles of damage, though high damage, uncapped AoE with short CDs is king? So should this actually be a Blizzard issue? Should Blizzard be looking at how to change Mythic Plus in ways where it's not just a case of this is the one solution? Because right now with Mythic Plus, it is very much a one solution thing, where it is just low CD, high damage, uncapped AoE burst, right? In some specs, yeah, they might be capped. So you look at Windwalker, it is capped in certain in most of its abilities, but it still performs very, very well. It's because it does so much damage in that capped environment that it still is really, really strong even in these uncapped scenarios, right? Because it just does so much damage. So should you just make everything this just massive AoE spewing damage? Or should you allow for scenarios where there are certain specs that perform very, very well in certain environments? Say you compare something like The Other Side, where it's, these smaller mob packs, you're pulling between on average, like 1 to 3 mobs at a time. When you're in, say, the Hakar or the Mechagon, or, the Millhouse area, you're pulling these smaller packs. And then you go to Ardenweald, and then suddenly everything opens up again, right? But in those scenarios, they're all single-target bosses. There's no AoE on bosses or anything like that, no cleave, really. So you should, in theory, be looking for these smaller pack single targety or these low target specs, but ultimately you're still finding that it's these high uncapped AoE specs that are doing really, really, really well and taken to these dungeons. And most people just go into Ardenweald and go big anyway, where they can get access to that big AoE. So I don't know that necessarily homogenization of damage profiles is the correct solution, but what I do think should happen is Blizzard should just be doing more regular balancing and tuning. I think they should just be tweaking a lot more regularly, right? You look at some of these other games where they're doing updates every week or every couple weeks, right? Where they're tuning these things and they're tuning champions or characters or whatever, guns and whatnot. Whereas it feels like Blizzard is very anxious to make any changes. And we have seen in Shadowlands that they have been doing better at this. They have been doing more of these more regular balance tunings. But is it enough? I don't know. I think they could be doing more to just bring in the outliers, so kind of bring in the lower end, bring in the upper end, and then just kind of make things a little bit more closer together in terms of damage. But ultimately, I don't know. I think Blizzard could be just doing a bit more with their tuning, but I don't know if it will be enough. I think at the end of the day, they're always going to be the strongest thing. There's always going to be the strongest spec or the strongest class in certain areas. But I think if we could try to, or if Blizzard can try to balance things where it can be a case of like bringing the class rather than bringing the spec, then we can just widen that pool of available players. So maybe you always do want a druid, or maybe you do always want a rogue or like a mage or whatever. But if you could at least bring any mage or any druid or any rogue, it just widens that pool a lot more and just increases the potential for people to get into dungeons. But let me know what you think in the comments. This was a little bit of kind of a reaction to things that Tettles said in his video. Like I said, I will link that in the description if you want to check that out. But yeah, it was a little bit rambly. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And yeah, if you want to, just comment down below if you have any kind of reactions to this. If you have any thoughts of your own, I'd be interested to see what you have to say. But thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.